Parc. This is a new role for me as of September. Prior to this, I was the Year 6 teacher for 8 years, as well as ALNCO and senior leader. So today I'm going to talk to you about how we redesigned our assessment arrangements 22 to 23, in line obviously with Curriculum for Wales. So as we progress through the presentation, I'll talk to you about obviously the following contents. So previous arrangements, vision for assessment and progression, mapping out the new, trackers and staff feedback, policy changes, and then progress meetings and accountability. So why this project? So as a newly appointed deputy head and having gained many new responsibilities, one of those being assessment coordinator, and obviously with the new curriculum being implemented and assessment arrangements changing as a result of this, obviously we needed to change some of our assessment arrangements and try and establish new, particularly as the national curriculum for levels are now a thing of the past. We needed to establish a vision for assessment and progression where we are mindful of accountability and ensuring our pupils are obviously making that progress as well. So previous arrangements. So in previous years, we used the following. So we used inserts and sims, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We also carried out moderation, particularly within our cluster of our Year 2 and Year 6 pupils' books. Obviously, that was reporting on national curriculum levels and using those national curriculum level descriptors. And we also took part in things like termly teacher assessment of core subjects, where we reported to parents on a termly basis in relation to the children's progress. A few other things to mention, which I've not listed there, are in-house moderation activities that we might have done, such as walk the books, and teachers, because we didn't want just Year 2 and Year 6 teachers to feel that they had a responsibility to moderate. We carried out lots of in-house moderation activities where teachers may be asked to moderate a piece of writing, or they might be asked to moderate a unit of work. So they are like some of the previous arrangements that took place. So as I just alluded to on the previous slide, we used to report to parents using progress reports. And those progress reports would give parents an overview of where their children were at the end of a term in particular. It would inform parents of the child's starting point, so from the September of their academic year, and their current level of performance. And obviously these sheets were differentiated according to year group, because obviously what's expected by the end of Year 6 would be different to what's expected by the end of Year 3. We also provided parents with updates on pupil progress through the use of end of year reports, parents' evening, and additional progress meetings if it was felt that that was deemed necessary. So moving on from like all the old arrangements, we felt that we needed to establish a vision, a new vision for obviously our new assessment arrangements. Knowing that we needed these changes to come into force, we asked staff to read key documents from the Curriculum for Wales in order to establish the shared understanding of what assessment and progression was and would look like. And the documents that they read were from Hub, and they were supporting learner progression, and the other one was what's changing in assessment. So once staff had engaged in directed reading tasks, we recognised that we needed to create our vision. For this, we needed a clear understanding of the why. We needed to establish how we were going to support learners at an appropriate pace, ensuring support and challenge, and that there was a progressive spiral approach. We vowed that we would endeavour not to use assessment to make one-off judgments of learners, and that we would reflect on individual learners' progress over time, and understand that group progress was essential in order for teachers to be able to reflect on practice as well. There is obviously a lot of information on that slide, and I'm happy to share this should you require it. So mapping out the new. So once the vision was established, we mapped out the new. So therefore, I worked with the professional learning lead to outline our key assessment arrangements for the year. And we presented this in a map format, which was then shared with staff shared with staff and obviously discussed. And this is the map that we put together in order to map out those assessment arrangements. So the map is organised under progression steps, and there are a range of baseline assessments, summative assessments, as well as assessments for learning and assessments in learning. We decided the cycle would be over 3 terms and would consist of some non-negotiables as well. As well as the non-negotiables, we decided that it was important to include some of our frameworks, in particular like the Voice 21 oracy framework, which teachers use on a regular basis to assess oracy skills within classes. So that's just a quick overview of how assessment arrangements looked. So once the assessment arrangements were agreed, we needed to identify how this was going to be tracked. And for each class, a tracker was generated for staff to input some of those assessment results. This is one of our tracking systems, and I know it looks quite complicated, but with Formula, it was quite easy to use. So the tracking system was shared with staff prior to going live, and that was through a staff training event. Staff were invited to feedback on the trackers, and they were able to give their thoughts about how the use of the tracking system would impact on their knowledge of pupil progress within their classrooms. Staff were really positive about the trackers. They liked the visual elements of the colours, and by inputting their own data, they agreed that they would have a far better understanding of their learners and where their learners needed to go next. In order to achieve this, as I just explained, formula was entered into the systems so that when any data was input, the score was compared to the national average for that particular year group. Depending on the standardised score the learner achieves, the colour was then generated. The same rule applied for benchmarking readers, but we had to decide what level constitutes the colour rating for each group, as all the year groups are obviously benchmarked on the same PM reading system. So e.g. a red in year 6 could actually be a yellow or a green in year 3, depending on their level and their outcome. And the colours represent the following. So the pink is our above average learners, so those MAT learners. Green on track or the upper end of average. Yellow is lower end of average, orange being below average, and red being significantly below. So due to the positive feedback from staff, we decided then that we needed to update our policies, and in particular our teaching and learning policy, as well as our ALN and intervention policy, in order to align with the new arrangements. And this was obviously to ensure that there was a consistent and coherent approach to assessment. So here is an example from the teaching and learning policy, where all agreed assessments are outlined for staff and guidance on the role of the TA in intervention and tracking also being outlined within that policy. So here we have an assessment and intervention overview, which outlines what support would have been put in place for children where assessment scores were of concern. The first column outlines the assessment that the children undertakes. The second column outlines the intervention that the children would need should their score be a red or of one of the lowest in the class. Some classes had lots of children who received red. An intervention obviously needed to be timetabled and children needed to be grouped according to that. And then the third column outlines how the intervention needs to be evident. So if obviously intervention is taking place, that we have that evidence basis to support that. So following this, we recognised the importance of accountability and felt that pupil progress meetings were essential. We felt that by holding these meetings, there would be increased input from staff, which would result in a better understanding of the accountability systems that had been put in place as well. So pupil progress meetings have been held with myself and each class teacher have attended following autumn term assessments. So the meetings actually took place on the first week of October. Each teacher came with their tracker of which all the data had already been input, as well as a knowledge of where the pupils were in terms of their observations and their day-to-day assessments. During the meeting, we discussed outcomes and we put in place arrangements for interventions. Teachers highlighted any pupils who performed well on a day-to-day basis, yet may have had concerning results from assessments. and we decided that those pupils will also be monitored. However, they may not receive an intervention initially. We obviously had to be mindful of the ALN code, and in regards to the ALN code, these meetings have allowed us to consider the pupils requiring universal and targeted support, and have strong justification for this. The meetings allowed for the ALN registers to be generated, and as ALN code, it allows me to ensure that they're up to date each term as well, because of ALN code coming in and those registers being a forever changing document. It's just a system now that works well for us as a school. And then, having established these new arrangements, we needed to obviously revise our old procedures. So we needed to consider again how we were going to report to parents, ensure that we devise a new progress report that not only reports to parents on pupil progress, but it reports on different areas really. So whereas before we had just our core subjects, as you can see now, the progress report has all the AOLEs, and for each of the areas we assess the children in a different way. So as you can see, for language, literacy and communication, we would score the children on their attitude and effort, their level of understanding and the progress made. And then up above in that table, you'll be able to see what sort of scoring system we would use for each of those things. Because what we felt was we couldn't have the same scoring system then, because you can't necessarily to say that a child has, well, I guess you can in some instances, but to say that a child is excellent, has excellent attitude and effort, excellent level of understanding, and excellent progress made, I know that does kind of make sense, but we just felt the terminology needed to be a little bit more specific. And whereas, particularly with those learners who may have an additional learning need, just because they might not be making excellent progress doesn't mean that they don't have an excellent attitude towards their learning, or that they're not giving 100% effort. So we just wanted to be a little bit more mindful of that. I did hold a parent meeting where we shared these progress reports with them, and we received positive feedback from that as well. But we also feel it's still essential that children are reporting on, you know, how they feel they are in relation to their learning, and we use the colour-coded system for that. So when it came to tracking, obviously following on from progress meetings, we decided, well, we needed to come up with something in order to track that. So we use a Google Forms as a way of tracking our interventions. This could be a group or individual based intervention. It allows us to monitor progress over time and ensure that those who need interventions are getting it regularly. The system allows us to have a comprehensive overview of individual children over time, and it also supports us then with our reporting to parents. We have a high level of learners who require support, so the system ensures that we're giving as much support as possible to those who need it. And then obviously in relation to what's next, whereas we used to use inserts and sims like that, we are moving now towards TIE 360, where we track learners through that, as well as obviously tracking what matters statements. Oh, sorry, I didn't even change the slide for that one. So yeah, so thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that you may have.